So, I want to tell you guys about the night I got arrested. It was the one and only time I've ever been arrested and went to jail. And it was simultaneously the worst night of my life and the best thing that ever happened to me. Real quick, if you're interested in purchasing prints of the painting that I'm working on in the video, they are only available through February 28th on my website. After that, they will no longer be available. This is a timed release print, so make sure if you're interested, head over there today and snag one. The full disclosure, this is not an easy story for me to tell, and I want to give everybody a fair trigger warning. I'm going to be discussing narcissistic abuse, reactive abuse, and cruelty to animals. So there's that. But in order to tell this story properly, I need to go back to 9 years ago, which was 5 years before I was arrested. So I was arrested 4 years ago, to the beginning of my relationship with my abuser. So we were both living in my hometown, and we met on a dating app and hit it off immediately. And the first 18 months were as near to perfect as you could imagine. Like, he was everything I ever dreamed of in a partner. My friends loved him, my family loved him. It was just perfection. And I thought this was the person I was going to spend the rest of my life with. And then I got an opportunity to buy a house in the Appalachian Mountains, and he was so adamant that I do that and that we move in and like away from everybody I knew and my whole support system. And it was a good opportunity to become a homeowner. So I took it, and he refused to help me buy the house, and he refused to pay rent when we lived in the house. And yes, that should have been red flag number one. But I honestly, at the time, I was so love struck, and I just could not imagine him ever wanting to harm me or having any nefarious reasons. So I was just like, yes, I will make the sacrifice. It's fine. I'm financially stable. I can do it. Once we moved in, everything changed. The very first thing that happened is that I immediately went to work when we moved in. Like the next day, I went to work full time. He didn't start his job for another 30 days, but he instantly started complaining that he was unpacking more than I was unpacking. And I thought that was, yeah, that's an obvious part of partnership. Of course, he's going to unpack more when he's home all day and I'm working full time. But no, that just was the beginning of him to start tearing me down. So the abuse started with small things at first. He would constantly blame me for every mess in the house, even if it was a mess that he made, I made it. And he would just try to constantly convince me that he never made messes and it was all me and everything was my fault. He would constantly complain that we didn't socialize enough, but like I was the one always making plans. He was never making any plans to socialize. I did all of the engaging with others, and then once we finally made friends, and I started getting close to people, he would tell me that there was something wrong with them. There was always something wrong with the friends that I made for us. There was something wrong with everybody. Anytime I got close to somebody, he would find reasons to tear them down. He would constantly tell me that we never traveled enough and we never did anything that he wanted to do when it came to vacation. But I did all the planning. I planned every vacation we ever went on for 5 years, and it was never enough. I always did something wrong. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't what he wanted. But then he never put in any effort, and it was always on me to fix why he was feeling so horrible. One of the things we originally bonded over was playing video games, but at this point, I couldn't do anything right. Anytime we played games together, he was just constantly screaming at me the whole time. And I just got to a point where I couldn't play games anymore. He rarely let me sleep a full night's sleep because he would stay up later than I would, and he would scream at his TV at like 3 a.m., even though I had to be up at 6, and would do that multiple times in one night. So I would just go to work completely exhausted on a regular basis. And then things got worse. When we were having arguments, I would do my best to stay very calm and to keep my voice as even as possible. I focused on trying to de-escalate any disagreement we had, and so that we could get to a place of understanding. And no matter what I did, if we got to a point where he couldn't explain his behavior, he would just start accusing me of yelling and immediately end the discussion because I was yelling. It got to a point where I would only whisper around him for weeks.
I would just whisper like this for weeks,
just to make sure that he wouldn't get upset. And that guy still told me that I was yelling anytime I made a fair point in an argument. It didn't matter what tone of voice I had. That was just his thing, was to gaslight me that I was bad. I was the reason we weren't able to have a discussion. It was me. And then the argument started to get really, really nasty, and he would call me the worst things anyone's ever called me, like the most derogatory things that I cannot say on YouTube. He would make fun of my body, tell me how disgusting I was, and how nobody would ever want me. He was the best I was ever going to get, and that this was it. Like, I had to stay because nobody else would ever want me. And then things got worse. We moved in, one of his friends who needed a job, so she got a job at the place that he was working at, and so I had her move into our extra room. And they were acting so suspicious. They would gang up on me anytime something happened and just tell me how horrible I was. And that didn't last long. It was about 4 months, but I think at that point that was where I really broke, because he just never had my back. But I didn't know what to do. I couldn't get out of the situation. So I had her move out after 4 months. But then things just got worse. We adopted a puppy, and I had never raised a dog before, and he claimed to have raised several, and that he knew everything about raising and training dogs. And he made me swear that I would do everything he said so that we could raise the puppy right and train him correctly. He made me swear when we first got the puppy that I had to do what he said. So he would hit the puppy and snarl at him and scream at the puppy. And anytime I questioned him, he said, this is what his mother would do to correct him in the wild. This is what happens. This is how you train a dog. And then one night he got so angry at the puppy that he threw him in his crate and would scream and poke at him with a stick and bang on the crate. And that's when I had to step in. I said, absolutely not. This isn't working. We are not doing this. And basically stood up to him on behalf of the dog. I am not going to lie to you guys. This is getting harder and harder to tell these stories. But then things got worse again. At one point I went to a conference for work, and the morning that I was supposed to return, I couldn't get a hold of him. I had called and texted, and for hours I heard nothing. And the entire drive home from the conference, I was so nervous. I had such a bad feeling. And when I got home, he was at work. So he wasn't there, but I couldn't find my cat. My cat that I'd had for years, my best friend, was missing. Wasn't in the house. I was walking around outside with his food bowl, shaking it, calling his name, and he always came when I called. No matter where he was in the woods, he would come. And then eventually he got off work and came home, and first thing I did was ask about my cat. And he told me that he found the cat dead in the road. And yeah. And when I asked to see the body, he refused. He would not let me. He couldn't show me what happened to the cat. He just said, take his word for it. And I was so distraught, but like I had such a bad feeling, and I just knew he had done something, but I couldn't prove it. So I like shook it off. I shook off that little voice in my head. But then things got worse. A few months after my cat died, I got word that one of my best friends and mentor died suddenly and unexpectedly. This was in the middle of COVID, but I had to go to the funeral. So I went to his cremation. But before I left to go to the funeral, I sat him down and I told him how important it was for him to be emotionally available and supportive of me during this time. Which, when I told my trauma counselor this story a year later, she told me that the fact that I felt the need to tell him I needed support after my friend died was a massive red flag in and of itself. But while I was on the trip to the funeral, he went completely MIA again. He wouldn't answer his phone. He went to work and just didn't come home till the middle of the night. And he left our puppy crated for over 14 hours. And then when he finally did turn up, told me that I was crazy for caring and wanting support, and that I needed to stop trying to control him. But he had left our dog in a small metal crate for 14 hours with no food, water, or bathroom, and insisted that I was the crazy one for caring about the puppy and for caring that he disappeared on me. I was just crazy. I was insane. Just totally gaslit me the whole time. And then finally, after years of taking his abuse, of being treated like a monster, of being gaslit, it all came to a head. I was on new medication and I'd had a couple of drinks, and we got into a fight. And they didn't tell me when I started this medication that sometimes some women get surges of hormones that can make them more aggressive, and that drinking will make that worse. So, for the first time ever in our 5 years of our relationship, I was completely incapable of de escalating the fight. So, for the first time, it turned physical. I was sitting on the edge of the bed on the floor, and while we were talking, again, me trying to stay calm but not really doing it, I had tapped his leg to emphasize my point, and he was like, "Don't touch me." And in the frame of mind that I was in, I'd had enough. So I pinched him lightly, and he retaliated by reaching over and pinching me as hard as he could on my shoulder. And in order to get out of the pinch, I threw the glass cup that I was holding, and it missed him, but like shattered on the wall, and he snapped. He reached into the pile of glass, grabbed a shard, and chased me around the room while I was apologizing, like, "Oh my God, stop. We're sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'm so sorry. Please stop. We need to stop." But he chased me around while I was begging him to stop, and ended up puncturing my right hand with the glass before he dropped it. And then he punched a hole in the wall and then hit me with the back of his elbow so hard that I saw stars and I collapsed. And then he picked me up and threw me on the ground, luckily right near my phone. And he kept a gun in his headboard, which was right in front of him. So I was pretty sure at that moment that he was going to kill me. So I call the police, and when he sees what I'm doing, he like laughs and says something along the lines of, "If I get arrested, I'm going to ruin your life." So the police come and we both give our statements, and they can't decide who they want to take in. So they end up giving us breathalyzers. And I am a very tiny woman. I'm 4'8", 120 pounds, and he's a 6-foot man, 180 pounds. And men metabolize alcohol faster. So of course, I had the higher blood alcohol content, and they took me in. Now, what's absolutely insane is that even after all of this, I still wanted to save the relationship. He had me so convinced that everything really was all my fault, and that if I would just be better, that things would actually work out. And if you've ever been on the roller coaster of abuse and then love bombing and then abuse and then love bombing, it's really absolutely insane how you get trauma bonded to a person and you can't imagine your life without them. It wasn't till several months later when somebody who he had been cheating on me with came forward and told me everything, and I realized he had been lying to me our entire relationship, and the person that I was in love with never actually existed at all, and it was like a flip just switched inside of me. And I came to the realization that I was actually so very abused, and I sought trauma counseling, and I was in trauma counseling for a year, and then I was single for another year after that. And I told myself that I was happy just being single forever, but then I reconnected with one of my oldest friends and we fell in love. And it was not easy at first. I definitely had a lot of trauma to still get through, where we had to build trust, but I was like so damaged after this relationship because I was terrified I was going to end up in another relationship like that. But I'm through it now and able to talk about it and get through this story with minimal voice cracking. Now, I'm sharing this story because I used to feel so much shame about that night that I had kind of turned violent. I used to be really, really ashamed and felt like I was a monster and I couldn't believe who I had become. I had lost control. But after, years to process and the counseling and everything, I've really come to be so grateful for who I had tapped into, that woman, that wrathful, vengeful woman that I tapped into that night, because she saved my life. She absolutely saved my life. And that wrath that I felt, that finally standing up for myself, was justified. It was righteous wrath. And my story isn't unique. This type of abuse happens to people every day. And when they finally snap and tap into like their darker selves in order to save themselves, they end up being blamed. Like, victim blaming is like a real thing that happens, and it can really be so damaging. But I have come to the realization that by tapping into my darker self, was able to save myself. And instead of going back to repressing this side of myself, I've spent a lot of time integrating her into me so that I can tap into her when it's needed, rather than waiting till something gets really bad or a situation gets horrible. And now I'm able to speak up for others. And when I see a man harassing a woman in a bar, I have no problem stepping in and being that person to say, absolutely not. We do not allow that. We are not going to let other people become victimized because we're too afraid to tap into the darker side of ourselves. Especially as a woman, I think society tells us all the time that we are supposed to be soft and nurturing and full of light and make everybody around us happy. Like, oh my God, babe, smile. Like everybody has to be feeling really good around you and in your presence. But no, there's another side to femininity, and she is dark and she snarls and she bites, and she is amazing. And I absolutely adore her. And I love that I have a fully integrated darker self now that I've gone through this. And I want to tell other people that have gone through this that this is absolutely okay. And you don't have to be ashamed of who you had to become in order to get out of your situation that was killing you. And that's why I created this painting, The Exaltation of Medusa, so that we can celebrate the goddess of righteous wrath within us, who comes when we need her to stop us from being victims, to petrify injustice and abusers where they stand, as a symbol of hope and permission to any woman or person who's had to tap into their darker side in order to save themselves. The original of this painting is currently available, so if you are interested, please DM me on my Instagram or send me an email. And the prints, again, are only available through the 28th of February, so we've got 3 days left to purchase those, and then they will not be offered again. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for listening to my story. I really hope that somebody hears this and gets out of a bad situation or forgives themselves for something that they had to do so that they could get out of a bad situation. And if you are in need of any support, please feel free to comment, and I'll do my best to provide any other advice of how I was able to get through this. Maybe it'll help. Okay, love you guys.